Well, hello there, YouTube subscribers. What we're going to take a look at today is an old MAC-15 chainsaw. I picked this up a couple years ago, and this was McCulloch's real foray into the consumer market back in the early 60s, probably maybe 59, 60, something on that order. And what they did is they basically took some components from existing models they had and basically really simplified it. A couple things I'm going to show you here. First of all, this entire piece here is all one cast section versus some of the other saws that they had at that point in time were several different pieces. And then they adapted, I've already taken this loose, so the oil tank was an adaptation. These kind of oil tanks you saw in many consumer saws, I think the David Bradleys, the Sears, some of the Clintons, something like that, I think all use something very similar. So it's possible that they picked these, outsourced these fuel tanks and basically used them. But you'll see that this entire structure here fits on all of this casting that's here. Now the other thing it does is it basically utilizes pretty much the same motor that was in the 140, 150 series saws. However, they've put it up vertical. This motor in the other saws sits horizontal like this. And I'll show you one. I've got a 150 here that I'll show you. And you can see that it's basically the exact same starter housing for the most part. This may very well fit right on here if I took it off. But you can see all the other stuff, all this air box, handlebar, front oil tank, clutch cover, etc. All of the oil and choke mechanisms here. And this handlebar is probably, this is all 3 or 4 pieces here. So they really tried to simplify it and to get the price down. I recall seeing an old advertisement on these somewhere, maybe on eBay or something like that for sale. I think they sold in 1960 for like $129 versus some of these other saws, the bigger professional saws at the time were in the several hundred range. So you can see the carburetors here. Normally this saw would have had, this would have been where the air box would have, this portion right here would have attached right here. Carburetor would have been sitting up here. And on this side down here where the carburetor is now, that would have been the stuffer plate where there would have been the oil tank. But instead they put the oil tank up here. So that's just kind of how they adapted some of the parts that they used back in that point in time to really make a simplified, less expensive version using some of the similar components to basically put a saw in the market for the consumer. So now when I got into, I've had this for a couple of years, and the other day I thought, well heck, I haven't even tried to see if it would start or not. So I got it down off the shelf and started tinkering around with it a little bit. And before I did anything, basically, I looked in the cylinder, and there's another little thing that's kind of interesting. And I'll take the muffler off here, and I'll try to show it to you. There's another. One of the key differences is this saw only has one ring on the piston, whereas this one has 2 80cc saw, same as the 150 that I just showed you, but this one only has one ring on it. Which is kind of interesting. So it must have been another way for them to save some money and keep the cost down a little bit. So what we've got to do, what I noticed after I kind of got through some of the basics, I looked in the gas tank and it was a rusted mess. And so I took the gas tank off, which is very easy, just simply one bolt and you lift it right up. But it was significantly rusted, and I'll show you what I've been doing here. The oil side, what I did is I put a number of wood screws in there and put them in there, put the cap back on, shake it up, and walk around and shake it, and tries to knock some of that rust loose. And you'll see here on my bench where I've emptied it out what kind of rust has already come out of there. So we're gonna do that a few more times to get that rust out, and then I'm gonna line the tank with some cream fuel tank liner, which will put a nice white seal on that tank so it won't have any more rust. And once we get this cleaned up, I'm going to take it out and blow it off now with some degreaser solution, and then we'll clean up the tank. We'll bring it back together. I know it has spark, so that's a good thing. I'm probably going to have to do something with the carburetor. I'm 99% sure of that, but before we get to that, we'll get it all cleaned up, get the fuel tank ready, and just kind of see what we have. Okay, we took this out and blew it off, got it cleaned up a little bit better than what it was, got some of that old grease and sawdust junk off of there, and makes it a little nicer to work on. Here, we're doing a final shake with the screws inside on this fuel can, or fuel tank, and then we're going to put a little acetone in there, blow it out, and we'll blow it out with the dust first and see what we got here. Okay, I've done a couple rinses with some acetone, and I'm still getting a little rust out of there when I dumped a little bit of acetone out, so I think I'm going to do it again, and we'll do that a few more times until it starts coming out without as much rust, because I want to get it dried out, and then when we put the sealer in there, it'll seal everything up, but I want to get as much of that rust dust out of there as we can. Okay, we've got our cream fuel tank lining. I've used this before on another saw that really puts a nice coating inside the tank and really seals up any leaks or pinholes that might be in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to pour some of this in there and then just slosh it around. I put a bolt in this hole here where the fuel line comes. So I don't want any of this stuff around those threads. So put that bolt in there for the time being. So we're going to pour a little bit of this in there and then slosh it around and get a nice coating on everything. Okay, we're going to let this set up now overnight, and that'll give it a nice hard coating in there, give it 24 hours to seal up good, and that stuff will solidify, and it's already made a nice coating in there. Okay, a little progress update. I got the fuel tank back on, got that all cleaned out and coated on the inside. I'm going to show you what the inside looks like, if you can see down in there. You can see that there's a nice white coating down in that fuel tank, and the oil tank was fine. Okay, as I suspected, the carburetor on this thing was a mess, so I had to pull the carburetor apart and put a kit in it, and I didn't have the exact same kit for this exact carburetor, which is it's a Tillotson HL13A, and I think this is the only saw that it was on, to be frank. But they're similar enough, at least in the metering diaphragm, that a diaphragm from one of the more traditional HL carburetors will fit this. Now, the only difference between this carburetor is an HL19, and the only difference is that this one, since it has a gravity fuel feed right down the tank here, doesn't have a fuel pump on it. So there's no bottom of the carburetor here, there's no fuel pump. So it's only that metering diaphragm that operates the float that's needed here. So still got a little bit of a gas leak coming down here, so I need to fix that. But at any rate, that worked, and as soon as I put the carburetor back on and gave it a little shot of gas, it worked just fine. Probably need to adjust the jets a little bit to get it running a little better. I need to work on this fuel leak, but I think it's the fuel hose right here. I didn't change that. I've got another little piece that I can do that. So anyway, there's your MAC-15. We'll put a chain on it here, not too long here when I get around to it, and we'll take it over and put it in some wood and dial it in a little bit. So hope you enjoyed the video.